Argentina is in full electoral mode with the deadline for every presidential candidate to have registered have arrived on Saturday, last Saturday. So today we are going to discuss who are the main stakeholders, what are the actual chances of winning the race, and what will Argentinian voters bear in mind when it's time to cast their ballots. This is Latam This Week from the Brazilian Report, and I am Gustavo Ribeiro, Editor-in-chief of the Brazilian Report. So to discuss Argentina this week, we have our all-in-all expert in Argentina, our Buenos Aires correspondent and Latin America editor, Ignacio Portes. Nacho, hola, ¿qué tal?
Hey, Gustavo, good to be here again.
So, Nacho, let's go straight to our main topic. We had the deadlines for all candidates to register, and we had a few surprises, right? So, can you start with the main surprises, and then we go into who will be the leading candidates to this race for the Casa Rosada?
Right. The biggest intrigue we had until the candidate registration deadline, which was last Saturday, was who was going to be the Peronist candidate, right? The ruling coalition has been quite chaotic, really, this couple of years with President Alberto Fernandez and Vice President Cristina Kirchner engaged in constant infighting, and both announcing a few months ago that they wouldn't run for president, neither the incumbent Alberto Fernandez nor the powerful Vice President Cristina Kirchner. So there was a bit of a vacuum to see who would be the successor, as we said in one of our newsletters, right? And the main candidates were maybe Economy Minister Sergio Massa was one, and who is more of a centrist figure, a politician who took over the ministry in a time of a run against the peso on a big crisis last year. There was a few of more Cristina loyalist candidates who lean more left, like Eduardo de Pedro, like his Buenos Aires province governor Axel Kicillof. But everyone had pros and cons, and it wasn't. No one had a really perfect case to be the candidate. In the last couple of days,
by the way, Nacho, sorry to interrupt you, but I remember for this newsletter you just mentioned, we used as our illustration a poster of Succession, the HBO hit drama, and without going into too much into spoilers, we nailed it, right? Because the candidate that actually won this Peronist race also was replacing the person that won the HBO Succession race.
You are spoiling it a little bit. You have to. So I think we need to put a little spoiler warning here. But ultimately, what happened was a last minute turnaround, just like in the series, right? There was a guy who seemed to be winning. There was a leak to the press that Eduardo de Pedro was going to be the guy. He's like a protege of Cristina Kirchner and more of a left wing.
I remember a few Brazilian outlets started publishing, like De Pedro confirmed. As
many Argentinian outlets did too. It wasn't Brazilians' problem. But we didn't, thankfully, because there was constantly this idea that there was still the possibility of having a unified candidate supported by both Alberto and Cristina Kirchner, by the president and the vice president. Until the 24 hours before the deadline, Eduardo de Pedro, who was endorsed by Cristina Kirchner, was going to have a primary against Daniel Scioli, endorsed by President Alberto Fernandez. But in the last 24 hours, there were pressures that, okay, if Eduardo de Pedro steps down, my candidate will step down too, and we will have a unity candidacy of Sergio Massa, the economy minister, as the not really sole candidate, because there will be a challenger from the left in the Peronist ruling coalition, which is Juan Grabois, but the candidate supported by the majority of important players in the ruling coalition, most importantly, Cristina Kirchner, the provincial governors, the President Alberto Fernandez, and so on, which is Massa.
No, and what I want to ask you is, so we have Argentina with depleted international reserves, with over 100% inflation. For a foreign observer, having all your chips being held by the economy minister of all ministers does not seem that intuitive. So can you explain a little bit, like, why the choice for Massa, and how competitive is he really?
Well, that's yeah, it's true. It's very counterintuitive. Inflation, in fact, went up since Massa took office. He took office last year, but what he can claim is that the government is a bit less chaotic since he took office. Many see him as the prime minister, as the de facto prime minister. The infighting in the government between Alberto and Cristina cooled off a little bit.
So that's a great slogan. Vote for me. I'm less chaotic. Just less.
Well, yes. I mean, Argentina is in a turbulent time in which people are asking a bit for order, right? And this is the times in which more right-leaning candidates usually are more successful. And Cristina Kirchner has had trouble to field a candidate that's loyal to her and simultaneously appealing to a majority of the public. This is really the sticking point. She has like a strong minority backing her that's around 30% of the country, but that's not enough to win a general election, right? This is why she went with Alberto Fernandez last time, who is more of like a center-left guy. And now he goes with Sergio Massa, who is more like a centrist guy, but who can politically be really all over the place. He's pragmatic. He can talk with the right, with the left. He's the ultimate. Let's do what's convenient at the moment. Let's take the temperature of society, and if they want to go right, we go right. They want to go left, we go left. Whatever. So they had been building a rapport that there are many ups and downs in their relationships. Massa was a cabinet chief of Cristina Kirchner many years ago. He ran the Argentina's pension system many years ago, but eventually they split in 2013. Massa ran against Cristina. He beat her in the 13 midterms, and they were terrible enemies for 4 or 5 years. In between, let's say, 13 and 18, more or less. But during when the center-right took office during Macri's government, they started to come closer again. But still, Cristina preferred to go with Alberto Fernandez as her candidate. And eventually, all these fights between president and vice president helped Massa start to be seen by Cristina as the more pragmatic, realistic, practical politician that could be solve her both the economic and the political problems. Maybe not solve them, but help them navigate them more quietly.
Give Peronist a fighting chance, right?
And yeah, I think they have a more of a fighting chance with him than with Eduardo de Pedro, because Massa is more appealing in a runoff, right? The problem in a country whose public opinion is turning right after many years of more of a left-wing hegemony during the Kirchner years. Now, all the rest of the candidates, which we're probably going to talk about next, are from the center to the far right. And because there's no appealing left-wing candidates at the moment. So Cristina had to concede this and retreat strategically to maybe the Buenos Aires province, which is a Peronist stronghold, which she can more easily win. That's where she put all her guys, her loyal allies in Congress for governor and etc., for mayors and so on. This is where her troops will try to find refuge in these elections, while Massa tries to be at least competitive nationally to preserve a good amount of congressmen, even if he doesn't win, right? Being competitive is important to keep power in Congress and so on.
Right. So you mentioned that the appeal is now tilted to the right. And like you said, Massa is a centrist who can flirt with the right when it suits him, and he's the more left-leaning candidates among the
big ones,
the big ones, the ones who have a shot. So who are the challengers that he's going to face? Because it feels safe to say that Argentina will have a change, either from the center left to the center or to the right or the far right. So who are the traditional right-wing candidate and the far-right candidate?
Right. Yes, it's true. I mean, the more continuity candidate is Massa, but they are trying to sell it as a change of some kind because the president is very unpopular. So they are trying to say Massa is something different, but he would be the most similar candidate for sure. And if you look to the other options, what you have is two candidates in the center right who are Buenos Aires City Mayor Horacio Rodríguez Larreta, who is a person that is not so dissimilar to Massa. He's a bit of a centrist, a pragmatist who can. Right now, he's flirting more with the right, but he can like build alliances with the center left, no problem. He's a more of a technocratic mind, very.
And what is Larreta promising to voters? What is his selling pitch?
Like he's saying, we can end with Kirchnerism, but we need to do it with a broad coalition. We need to do it cautiously. We need to do it not stirring passion so much as Argentina has done in the past. We need to not repeat the mistakes of Macri's government. We need to try to be as plural as we can, and so on. While here, so he's seen as a dove internally in the center right. He's seen as a more of a guy who can talk with Peronism, and that can be seen as positive for many people, but also as due to the very strong anti-Peronist sentiment that we are seeing in Argentine society right now, that can be a negative too. So this is where Patricia Bullrich, his internal rival, comes up, right? She's the hawk, let's say, in the center-right coalition. She's a former security minister, which says a lot already, right? She's a very law and order person.
Mano dura.
Yes, mano dura. And a bit of a Giuliani profile, let's say, but also very saying that we have to be pure, right? We don't need Peronists in our coalition at all. We don't want to talk with Peronists. And economically too, we need to make changes fast, quickly. We need to cut public spending and so on. She has her economic teams proposing rapid changes to the right, and she has been important in trying to contain the escape of votes to the far right candidate, who has been a big factor in the whole presidential race, who is Javier Milei, who is outside this center right coalition. He has his own one candidate coalition. And
before we get into Milei, let me just ask, because then our social media team is going to kill me because I forgot to mention this earlier, but I want to ask our viewers to subscribe to the Brazilian Report, because we are an independent media outlet and we live off subscriptions. So you can go to brazilian.report/subscribe. We have different kinds of memberships. One of them will certainly feed your needs and your budget. And they start at only $3.90. I mean, you won't even buy a cup of coffee in many cities in the United States by that much, many of the big cities at least. So it starts at a very low rate, and depending on how much you need information on Latin America and Brazil, you can have more newsletter services, articles, weekly and daily newsletters for you. So go to brazilian.report/subscribe. And if you're already a subscriber, you can go that extra mile and actually pay us a cup of coffee every now and then. God knows that journalists really need some coffee especially I think in Brazil and Latin America, where the news are always relentless. So you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report. And if you want to support us in a more permanent fashion, you can go and subscribe to a membership, and that includes exclusive content, behind the scenes content. So I think like one of the reasons for this crisis in the press is because people don't necessarily know how journalism is done, and we try to show in a very transparent way how we do our stories. For instance, we had this major scoop just a couple of weeks ago on how the semiconductor race almost cost Brazil its democracy, and we explain with a lot of detail how we got that story and how we made it happen. So go to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian report. So Nacho, back to Argentina. You're going to talk to us about Javier Milei, not only the wildest haircut in this race, but also the wildest proposals, right?
Yes, yes. He's been in the really even before the election season started in the last couple of years. He's been very crucial in moving like the Overton window of Argentina to the right, the acceptable ideas to the right, and he's been and he has forced really or helped, depending on whose point of view you see it, to move the center-right coalition more to the right. Some people wanted this. I think Macri wanted this. So he's been instrumental for Macri in some ways in helping him move the agenda more to the right, because Macri thinks he failed because he was too weak, not because he was too strong, as maybe Larreta thinks inside his coalition, right? Macri's more siding with the hawks inside the center-right. And so Milei, he has helped move the conversation in that direction, proposing. I mean, it's not only what he proposed, but the tone he uses, right? He speaks about burning down the central bank and using like a saw to cut public spending and to cause all politicians corrupt, and like he calls them a caste. Like a case system of politicians, and he's always on TV. He's angry, he's scruffy and shouting, and has this just angry expression that expresses the general anger in many Argentines at a time of economic problems and so on. Also, a very tough line on crime, although maybe that's not his central attractive point, but he has been very tough on crime in his proposals, and with some. I mean, this was him at the start, and this made him very successful on TV. But he's been having some problems lately too, in that even though this part of his agenda has been pretty popular, he has some very crazy beliefs, including that he's kind of a very ideological libertarian in the sense that everything can be bought and sold. And even organ sales can be good if it's voluntary agreed between the two parts. And journalists have been pressing him on these issues, and he has committed all kinds of stupid faux pas in the press, and looked really stupid in the last couple of months in that sense. So he has, and he's also his candidates, right? His entourage has been exposed as full of pretty crazy people, and that has hurt him a little bit, and maybe favored Bullrich, right, as a competitor, which is what Macri always wanted to do. Just use Milei a little bit, give him space in the friendly media to move the right, and then destroy him by exposing him.
And say we are a more palatable version of this dude, right?
Yes. Bullrich is a bit like that, more normal, right? She dresses normally, she speaks normally. At least she seems like she tries to cultivate like a Thatcher profile, something like that.
So you're mentioning candidates that are widely different between themselves.
Yeah.
And who makes the stronger appeal? I mean, do we know what polls are saying in terms of both voting intentions, but also what are the top of mind issues that Argentinians have?
The economy is number one, and crime is number two. I think those are the two.
Is Argentina experiencing a big surge in crime? I mean, what's the status there? Why is crime so important for voters?
The economy is number one by far, and crime is number two. I think not so much because of crime per se, but due to a general idea that of the need for law and order, to stop public protests. That's a very big factor in the cities, to stop roadblocks. Like if you go to the Buenos Aires city center, it's constant protests, constantly the main avenues are cut. People that drive taxis, that are all the time in the street, are constantly complaining. And they have been complaining for years, really, in that Kirchnerism has been pretty tolerant with public protest. and they want to be not tolerant anymore, right? We've seen in the last few weeks protests in the provinces, in the northern province of Jujuy, that have been pretty violently repressed by the police, and most people support that. Even if they maybe agree with some of the cause, they say, well, you cannot do roadblocks anymore. We're tired of this. And this, even the Larreta's vice presidential candidate, who's supposed to be the moderate, is the governor of Jujuy, who led the repression against the protesters in this northern province. So this shows you how they are all trying to have something to show that they're tough, that they cannot be, that they will not be soft either on let's say public spending or on crime. So that's the they go hand in hand a little bit, both things.
Right. So before I let you go, I think what we could use as the fun fact of the week is a very specifically Argentinian thing, which is the PASO, which are the primaries, because they're a much bigger deal in Argentina than in most countries. They are a very unique way of Argentina has a very unique way of doing primaries. So can you explain a little bit, because we're going to have primaries in August, right? And then the elections are in November.
Yes, August 13, October 22 is the general election, and November eventually maybe the runoff if there's two candidates and none of them passes the 45% threshold.
So how does the PASO or the primaries work in Argentina, and why are they so important?
Right. The thing with the primaries, as we call them, PASO is an acronym that stands for mandatory, open, simultaneous primaries. That means that when you go to the voting booth, you have ballots for every candidate. You don't need to, it's not like the primaries in the US, let's say, where you need to be maybe a registered Republican or a registered Democrat or at least an independent to vote in a primary. You go to the voting booth and you have all the ballots of every candidate of every party, from Peronism to the left, to the right, to the center right, and you can choose one as
just one. You cannot choose like one candidate per coalition. You can only choose one among everyone.
Right. You choose in which primary you're voting, and you put that vote in a common ballot. And at the end of the day, all the votes get counted, and you get, for example, let's invent some numbers. Peronist Massa gets 30%, and the left-wing challenger of Massa, Grabois, gets 5%, and Bullrich gets 20%, and Larreta gets 15%. And that means that Bullrich beats Larreta in the center-right primary, and Massa beats Grabois in the Peronist primary, in the, let's say, center-left primary. And those two candidates go to the final election on October. So this is one thing that the primary decides, right? Who will be the candidates in October, as in every primary. But since these primaries are mandatory and everyone can vote, they also give you a really good impression of how the final elections are going to be in October. Because if you add up the totals of the two Peronist candidates and the two center-right candidates and the total of Milei, who doesn't have an internal challenger, and the total of every other party, you get generally a pretty good idea of who's going to be the winner or who is close to being the winner. So you add up the totals and you say, for example, let's say that the center-right got overall 10% more votes than the center-left, and you see, oh, the center-right is probably going to win in October, because in the primaries, their candidates in a mandatory vote already got 10% votes more than the center-left candidate. So the primaries really not only elect a candidate for each coalition, but they also give you a really good impression of who's going to be the overall winner, or which candidates are going to go to a runoff eventually in November. So they give you much more information. They're more decisive than a normal primary in another country.
And I mean, this will be the fourth election with this use of primaries, right? What do the previous three goes tell us? Are the electoral results pretty much like a carbon copy of the primary results, or are there a lot of discrepancies?
Not a carbon copy, but they give you a good idea. And Argentina polls are extremely unreliable. People don't respond to polls a lot, and pollsters lie a lot for candidates. The candidate who pays for the poll gets the results they want. So polls are extremely unreliable. So the best poll you have is the primary. It's a one-to-one poll, right? Of course, there's usually a bit more participation in the general election than in the primary. Not a lot, but a bit more. There can be some pragmatic voters that say, for example, if I'm a far-right voter and I want Milei to win, but I see that Milei only got 10% and I see he's not going to win. Okay, maybe I switch to Bullrich, who's the closest thing I have, and she's more competitive. And maybe that way I can beat Kirchnerism. So there can be some changes between the primary and the general election. But in the past presidential elections that we have, the primary said a lot. For example, in 2011, which was the first presidential election with a primary, Cristina Kirchner got a surprisingly high amount of votes. She was not seen as a clear favorite by the pollster, but she got like 50% of the votes in the primary. And people say, okay, she's going to win. The second candidate got like 20%. And people knew it was over in the primary. If she got 50% of the total votes, she won. The same happened in 19 when Alberto Fernandez got like 48% in the primary or something like that. People said, okay, it's over. So the primaries can really be decisive. And this is important for like people who bet in the betting markets, in the stock market and so on. The August primary can be the one that tells you what is actually going to happen when the general election comes. So they get a lot of attention due to that.
All right, I think we're going to leave it there. Nacho, thank you very much. And I mean, of course, we're going to keep a close eye on how this race unfolds. And I think it's just going to be getting busier and busier from now on. Nacho, thank you very much and hope to see you soon. And once again, I just want to say to people, go subscribe to the Brazilian Report, which is the journalistic engine behind every piece of content that we have, and all of the things we have on YouTube, TikTok, or our podcast. They're just like a tiny sample of all the content that we do. So go to Brazilian.report and /subscribe, and you're going to have a whole lot more of content. Or you can buy us a cup of coffee. Go to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report. If even more simpler, just flash that QR code next to Nacho's head on the bottom right corner of your screen. And then you can donate from 1 cup of coffee to 1,000,000 cups of coffee if you have that money and that kind heart. So thank you very much. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. And Nacho, see you next time.
See you next time, Gustavo. Bye-bye.
Ciao.